That's a good song. It's a good song. It seems so blasted.
Yeah, it's a great song, Leonard. Welcome back to CBC News Sunday. The Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame is paying tribute to Leonard Cohen today. You'd think it's about time, and it is. Cohen's songs poetically evoke the sensual and the sacred, but writing them has never come easily for the man. I've had to scrape them out of my heart, Cohen once said. But of course, Leonard Cohen had a muse for his most famous song. It's a song about a lovely woman named Suzanne. But whatever happened to the real Suzanne? Well, Paul Kennedy, the host of CBC Radio's Ideas, found Suzanne a long way from that place by the river.
Now Suzanne takes you down to a place near the river. You can hear the boats go by. You can spend the night beside.
You'd be hard put to find anybody over 40 who doesn't know Suzanne. And almost everyone knows Leonard Cohen wrote it.
And she feeds you tea and oranges that come all the way from China.
But not many people know who the song is actually about. This is her story. It's less poetic and more complex than you might imagine, even tragic. Beautiful young woman, an artist in her own right, inspires an up-and-coming young poet to write an immortal love song. They inevitably part ways. His career takes off. Her life falls slowly apart.
You've always been her lover.
I recently met Leonard Cohen's muse, Suzanne Verdal, in Venice Beach, California. Suzanne finds emotional support in the colorful and eccentric bohemian community that thrives there.
Well, Venice Beach is an old landmark for the intellectuals, writers, artists of the 30s and 40s, and the free spirits, the free thinkers. Bohemian life is still alive and well down here. It's not as obvious as before, but it's still here.
It's a life Suzanne cannot live without. But to try to truly understand what makes Suzanne tick, it's important to revisit bohemian life in the streets of Montreal in the early 1960s. Montreal was far and away the most exciting city in Canada back then. Clubs on St. Catherine Street never seemed to close. Montreal was, well, sexy in both official languages. At the time, Leonard Cohen was at the center of a vibrant group of young English poets. Sculptor Armand Vaillancourt occupied a similar space among Québécois French artists.
He's a friend because I have great respect for this man and for his songs, beautiful, you know.
Vaillancourt wasn't just a sculptor. He was married to Suzanne Verdal, and it was Armand who introduced her to Leonard Cohen.
He watched the whole evolution, Leonard did. Seeing this young schoolgirl, me, I was just out of high school, you know, meeting this demigod, as it were.
And then we started to go together, and she quit Imagine her boyfriend, and we went for quite a time. I don't know how long we worked together. It's like vague in my head. And we accomplished many things while we worked together. Traveling, having fun.
It's 1965. The swinging 60s are in full swing. Suzanne, the song, was born in this Montreal Mountain Street coffee house called Le Bistrot. Here's how Leonard Cohen remembers the occasion now.
There was a Suzanne who was associated with the song, and her name is Suzanne Vaillancourt. She was the wife of a friend of mine, Armand Vaillancourt. I loved Suzanne Vaillancourt. She was very beautiful and very mysterious. She was a very unusual spirit. So I certainly felt that when I was young, and a lot more. But she did invite me to her place near the river and did serve me tea and oranges, and So she allowed me to locate the song.
Well, it was a very private thing that I felt like I had with Leonard. It was kind of like a very simpatico wavelength thing where we'd read each other's minds, kind of. We were very in tune with each other. And so it was kind of strange to have it blossom into this famous song that everyone was singing.
Leonard Cohen was always a bit of a ladies' man. From his perspective, he's never spent a lot of time trying to discourage this reputation. He's a sexy guy, like the city he grew up in, but he's on record saying he didn't want his relationship with Suzanne to be, as he put it, compromised by carnality. Here's how he explained himself during an interview in the mid-90s.
It's not just the copulation. It is the whole understanding that we are irresistibly attracted to one another, and we have to deal with this. We are irresistibly lonely for each other, and we have to deal with this. We have to deal with our bodies and with our hearts and souls and minds, and it's an urgent appetite.
For you've touched her perfect body with your mind.
That's what he said. Here's what she says.
I was the one that put the boundaries on that. Because Leonard is actually a very sexual man, and very attractive and very charismatic. And I was very attracted to him. But somehow I didn't want to spoil that preciousness, that infinite respect I had for him and for our relationship. And I felt that a sexual encounter might demean it somehow.
That precious relationship produced a great piece of art.
Suzanne takes you down to
Judy Collins was the first to have a hit with Suzanne in English, but it soon went round the world. Pauline Julienne sang it in French. A pre-ABBA Frida sang it in Swedish. There's even a Polish version.
Then she gets you on her wavelength, and she lets the...
In fact, it's been covered hundreds of times, although it's impossible to ignore the original. Even Leonard Cohen himself can't hide his pride.
That's a good song. It's a good song. It seems to have lasted. To place a song into the air and have it last 20 years it's a wonderful feeling.
By the time the song Suzanne made the hit parade, the Muse was no longer in contact with Leonard Cohen. She worked initially in Montreal as a dancer and choreographer at Expo 67. She danced on her own for CBC, then left for San Francisco, the south of France, Texas, New York. Her path eventually crossed Cohen's again in the late 1970s.
I saw him in Minnesota, Minneapolis, I think, after a show. I went back. I was living there at the time, and I went backstage to see him after his show. And there was so many people around him, reporters and journalists and so forth. And he spied me in the crowd, and he said, I went over to him and I said, hi, did a great show. He says, you gave me a beautiful song, girl. So it was a nice moment. And I left after that. I didn't have a chance to talk one-on-one.
You did give him a pretty beautiful song. I mean, if anyone thinks about Leonard Cohen, Suzanne is the song that everyone thinks about.
That's probably true.
In the early 1980s, after wandering around the world, Suzanne found herself back in Montreal. She opened up a dance studio here and got more gigs on TV. Professionally, things were pretty good, but her personal life was in shambles. She was a single mom with 3 kids by 3 different fathers, and she still found it impossible to put down roots. In 1992, she built herself a mobile wooden camper and headed west. Soon, Suzanne was back in California again, driving around LA trying to get work as a choreographer for music videos. She also started to make new friends, friends like Karen, whom she met in circumstances that seemed so LA.
I was on a blind date in a little Thai restaurant in Venice, and there was nobody in the restaurant but me, my blind date, and some other couple in the corner. And I asked this guy, getting to know him, you know, what kind of music do you like? And I told him I like Leonard Cohen. And I sang Suzanne to him. And all of a sudden, this beautiful woman appeared, and she told me in a very sweet, humble way that she was Suzanne.
And Jesus was a sailor when he walked upon the water.
Just as things were beginning to go almost as well as anybody would have wanted, disaster struck.
My back injury was a major turning point in my life, and where I had an accident and broke my back and my wrists severely.
How did that happen?
Well, I fell off a ladder off my little gingerbread house.
Suddenly, a dancer couldn't dance because of a badly injured back. Suzanne found herself with no money and increasingly depressed.
When I broke my back, to be honest with you, I had some very dark moments of despair where I was suicidal. But yes, I've been homeless for 3 years because of my financial circumstances. And I'm technically disabled, and you cannot find a place to live on disability.
For the past few years, Suzanne has been driving every day to a dead-end street in an industrial subdivision where she parks the truck and spends the night. It's where she sleeps and cooks and eats. Suzanne has always known how to find help from her friends. This is Raj, an astrologer and aspiring screenwriter who met her in his booth on Venice Beach.
She is a very giving and nurturing soul, and I think that people need that. If she had a house out here, she'd still take you down and feed you oranges. I believe that.
And then there's this guy called Jingles. He's a friend of Suzanne who almost needs no introduction because he's wearing something like his autobiography, even as we speak. Shortly after we start talking, it's obvious that Jingles has more questions than I do.
You mean to say Leonard Cohen, that was the person that inspired that song?
You didn't know that?
Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
That is true.
She is Suzanne from Leonard Cohen's song.
Oh, well, I'd like to know how that all manifested, because I love Leonard Cohen. He's like, you know, I worship the ground he walks on. I love his music and his voice, his songs, his poetry. Is that true?
You didn't know that?
No. Did they know each other?
You know that? Does it change the way you feel about her?
No, even more. I respect her more. Did they know each other?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So now that I know that, it makes it even more joyful. That's really beautiful. Wow, that's real special.
Despite new friends like Jingles, despite former friends like Leonard Cohen, there's nothing easy about being homeless. Suzanne has to drive around town just to find a place to shower or even use the bathroom. She credits her collection of stray cats with saving her life as much as she saved theirs. She often says she's made an art out of homelessness.
To live in a crawl space with a back in my condition, with 5 rescued animals, is no small deal. I'm a little weary, and the housing costs here are absolutely astronomical.
In our few days together around Venice Beach, Suzanne's gone through at least a dozen changes of clothes, or rather costume. It's always all about aesthetics.
Suzanne is one of these rare souls who is actually sincere and cares about life and people and sees the world in terms of beauty. I mean, a lot of people say that, but she's one of these people who actually lives it.
It takes more than a painfully broken back to keep Suzanne from dancing. Every Sunday there's a drum circle in Venice Beach. She goes there with her friends, like Karen. Dancing helps her to focus on where she's been and where she's going.
Well, you know what's kind of bittersweet and poignant is that I came here with high goals, and I didn't achieve much of those goals.
Her new goal is to write her memoirs, which recently brought her back to Montreal. When we come back, Suzanne will take me down to her place near the river.
And you want to travel with her, and you want... Now Suzanne takes your hand and she leads you to the river. She is where
we met up with Suzanne again in Montreal, just outside her place near the river.
I'd serve them tea, and jasmine tea that I'd get in nearby Chinatown, and purchase lychee nuts. They love that. A little treat, little mandarin oranges.
Probably from China. Both of them,
mandarin
actually.
Oranges.
China.
You know.
We visited a past that was full of pleasures and disappointments. Her old apartment has been turned into an upscale boutique hotel.
And over there, this was my door here, 202.
This is where Leonard came to visit you many times?
Yes, yes, several times. And when he came, he was quite impressed to see the, how shall we say, the frugal quality of my life at the time, but poetic nonetheless. And I was raving about how beautiful, look at the waterfront and look at the view. And I guess he took notice of that and wrote a poem about it.
We went inside room 202.
It's a bit like seeing the movie after reading the book. I can now tell my grandchildren I've stood exactly in the spot where Suzanne fed tea and oranges to Leonard Cohen. There ought to be an historical plaque. They don't even charge extra for the room.
I always gravitate towards water.
Just down the street from her place near the river sits Montreal's Place Jacques-Cartier. In the 80s, Suzanne used to dance here all the time, alongside other buskers. It's also the somewhat painful place where the poet last confronted his muse.
Leonard Cohen came up to me, and I saw him in the crowd, actually, and I went up to him and I curtsied to him, and I did a dance especially for him. I was very thrilled to see him there, his face in the crowd. And after the dance was done, he just walked away, and somehow that was a very disconnecting moment. I didn't understand. There was no acknowledgement from Leonard, and I just, I did think about that for quite a while, actually. It was rather upsetting.
I think the idea here is that Cohen's write songs.
Ed Palumbo considers Cohen to be among the most uplifting segments of his Canadian literature class at John Abbott College in Montreal.
All they say is that she's got her perfect body and that's it, that's all. It's not about physicality, it's all about her mind. Like, she's nuts, but they love her because of that.
Is that a positive thing? You know that she's half crazy and that's why you want to be there? Suzanne is what put him on the map, in a way. Is it all he's done? By no means. But in fact, it's certainly important. It's certainly key, I think.
Success does things to people. Quote, success, like fame. It could be that Leonard was intimidated by the fact that I stayed true to the 60s. I stayed true to those values, as it were. And he became a big star. And maybe it was embarrassing to him to see me still in my simplicity and my humility, while he was like, I don't know, I'm trying to understand these things, the mechanics of why we didn't connect anymore.
Is the muse expendable? Perhaps. I think in the case of Suzanne, it appears that she really is, or was. On the other hand, the muse is bigger than the poet, at least in the mythology. The muse is the source of, what there is. It's the inspiration. Does the muse have a claim on anything more than that role? My instinct tells me no.
Suzanne's first husband and Leonard Cohen's longtime friend, Armand Vaillancourt.
I think maybe, I don't know if Suzanne fall in love with him. I think Leonard is like a, you walk on the bush, you look at the one tree, well, you don't pass the rest of your life there. You move ahead, you have another place to go. And it's surely like that.
Yeah, I'm breaking a rail or something.
Suzanne, it seems, is always moving ahead, or at least along. In fact, she's on the road again. It just didn't work out in Canada this time, so she's gone back to LA, at least temporarily.
It's sad that that happens to the best of lovers or friendships. Bingo, go different ways and you don't really know why, just the energy's polarized. It leaves you with some kind of empty feeling.
And the sun pours down like honey on Our Lady of the Harbor.
It's hard to describe the feeling of meeting a fully certified, genuine muse like Suzanne. Leonard Cohen met her in Montreal in the early 60s. He wrote a song. I had the pleasure of meeting Suzanne in California 40 years later. It's still possible to see exactly what inspired the poet to write his song, but not even the perfect mind of a poet could ever hope to imagine where his muse has been in the meantime.
And you want to travel with her, and you want to
For CBC News Sunday, I'm Paul Kennedy in Venice Beach, California.
CBC Radio 1 is recording today's gala celebration of the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame for broadcast on Tuesday morning. Coverage begins with Sheila Rogers' exclusive interview with Leonard Cohen at 10 a.m., 10:30 in Newfoundland.
And you don't want to miss that beautiful song. And that story, by the way, was by Paul Kennedy and produced by Alex Sprinson. We always like to hear your comments on the stories we bring you. What are your muses and what your comments on that story or anything else? You can write to us at CBC News Sunday, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, Ontario, M5W1E6. Our email address is sunday@cbc.ca. You can call our toll-free number at 1-866-285-1818, and online anytime you can always reach us. The website address is cbc.ca/Sunday.